Washington Journal continues.
Independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders joins us from Capitol Hill this morning. Thank you for being with us. And to get started, here's a question. Should Democrats be ready to walk away from the bargaining table as as the Congress address this fiscal cliff? Should Democrats be willing to say, if we can't get what we want, we're willing to go over the cliff, essentially?
Well, I think all of us want to make sure, want to do everything that we can to see that the fiscal cliff is avoided. But I think what we have seen in the past is a level of obstructionism on the part of Republicans who said, hey, it's either my way or the highway. Elections have consequences. Democrats won a strong victory last Tuesday. President won big. Democrats won 25 out of 33 seats in the Senate. They won seats in the House. And one of the key issues during that campaign was whether or not we will extend tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country. And virtually every debate, every statement that the president made, every speech that he made, he said, I will not extend those tax breaks. And I think the American people voted for him, voted for other people. I was up for re-election. That's what I said. So I think it is incumbent upon the Republicans right now to understand that with a $1 trillion deficit and a $16 trillion national debt, millionaires and billionaires in this country are going to have to play a significant role in helping us deal with deficit reduction, and that burden cannot simply fall on working families of the middle class who are already being squeezed very, very hard as a result of this terrible Wall Street recession. So to answer your question, I hope we can avoid the cliff. But I think right now the president and the Democratic leadership have got to be strong and say to the Republicans, the American people, not only in this election, but in poll after poll after poll, have told us the wealthiest people cannot continue to get huge tax breaks. And Democrats, in my view, have got to remain firm.
Here's the bottom line of what the so-called fiscal cliff could look like. We're talking about a $607 billion reduction in the budget deficit. It includes nearly $400 billion in tax increases, over $100 billion in spending cuts, and then over $100 billion in other revenue changes. Senator Sanders, let's talk about entitlement programs that you've advocated for and fought for. Is there room to negotiate on the eligibility age of Medicare or Social Security? Where can you negotiate on those?
Well, let me just back up for a second, and
Sure.
I hope everybody knows when we talk about going over the cliff, it's a 10-year process. And I want everybody to be clear that if by December 31st an agreement is not reached, that does not mean that an agreement could not be reached in January or February, which would make unnecessary many of the terrible cuts that people have talked about. In terms of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, let me say the following. First point to be made, and I am very happy that Majority Leader Harry Reid has recently made this point, and ironically enough, back in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan made this point. Social Security right now has not contributed one nickel to the deficit because, as everybody knows, it's funded independently by the payroll tax, the 6.2% that workers put in and the equal amount that employers put in. So when people talk about deficit reduction, we've got a serious problem, but Social Security has nothing to do with that. In fact, today, the Social Security Trust Fund has a $2.7 trillion surplus, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 21 years. Our goal is to make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, so we've got work to do. But Social Security, in my view, has nothing to do with deficit reduction, should be removed from this discussion. And I was glad, as I mentioned a moment ago, that Harry Reid, Majority Leader, has made that point. I hope the President agrees with that. In terms of Medicare and Medicaid, what we should be clear about is that in the so-called Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, we extended the life of Medicare by over 10 years. I think we have got to do more. In America right now, we are the only nation in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right, which is why I am an advocate, a strong advocate of a single-payer Medicare for all system. I hope the state of Vermont will lead the country in that direction. But the bottom line is, our system today, including Medicare, is wasteful. It is too bureaucratic. we can make efficiencies in it. But at a time when seniors are struggling right now with their health care bills, will not support cuts in the benefits for people on Medicare. For example, one way that we can save money in Medicare is that when we pass the Medicare prescription drug Part D program, the Republicans insisted, put in writing, language that said that Medicare could not negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. The result of that is that in many instances, Medicare is paying higher prices for drugs than is the Veterans Administration or the Department of Defense. That is absurd. If we do that, we can save Medicare substantial sums of money. In terms of Medicaid, we are in the middle of a horrendous recession right now. We have 50 million people today who have no health insurance, and to say that we're going to just willy-nilly deny millions of kids health insurance by removing Medicaid from them is unfair. It just doesn't make sense to me. So my point is that right now we have an incredibly unequal distribution of wealth and income in this country. People on top are doing phenomenally well. As Warren Buffett reminds us, their effective tax rate is quite low. I think that by asking the wealthiest people to start paying their fair share of taxes, by ending enormous loopholes within corporate tax law, by taking a hard look at defense spending, in which we're spending 3 times as much as we did in 1997, the other waste that exists in many other federal programs, we can move to a deficit reduction in a serious way without attacking the needs of middle-income or working families.
Our guest, Senator Bernie Sanders, founded the Defending Social Security Caucus. Here's a story from the Paramus News in New Jersey. It says that caucus, as well as some House leaders, will hold a bicameral summit this afternoon to discuss legislative and grassroots efforts to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits. If you'd like to join the conversation with Senator Sanders, here are the numbers to call. Democrats, 202-585-3880. Let's go to the Republicans, 202-585-3881. And Independents, 202-585-3882. Our first caller is Joseph in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on our Democrats line. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, how are you this morning?
Good. You're on with Senator Sanders.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, number one, I'm glad to even get through. You got to be a master to be able to do this. But secondly, I would like to say that the physical cliff to the senator is not going to happen. No way and no how. The physical cliff is going to be avoided because we are America. We don't want our credit rating screwed around with much more. And also, I would like to say about the whole show this morning, it's just look. We elected a president fair and square. The majority won. Let's back our president, please. And that goes for the Republicans and independents who go back and forth, go to the extremes to make their points. The Republicans are already in extreme, and the Democrats are sort of like the even people. We are the people, and we will speak on this matter.
Okay, so Joseph saying that he thinks America, members of all parties and independents, should support the president. And also, Senator Sanders, he expresses a belief that the fiscal cliff will not be breached, that this will end up being a non-issue.
Well, I hope that he is right, and I certainly agree with him that elections have consequences. The issue of whether or not we extend Bush's tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires was the defining issue of this campaign. Everybody in America knows that. I think Mitt Romney knows that. And the president won a decisive victory. Democrats won 25 out of 33 seats contested in the Senate. They picked up seats in the House. So I think it's incumbent upon the Republicans to say, okay, you guys won, president's position won, and we're prepared to deal with that reality. And by the way, Libby, I find it interesting that we have a number of leading Republicans, conservatives, Bill Kristol among others, who said, yeah, okay, Democrats won, raising taxes on the wealthiest people in this country is not a big deal. And I think more and more Republicans are reaching that conclusion. I don't think they want to continue to be seen as obstructionists. So we hope that Republicans will come aboard and do what the American people want. By the way, just another point, when we talk about cutting Social Security, there is one concept out there which I strongly oppose. It's called the chain CPI. This would reformulate COLAs, cost of living adjustments. It would not only cut benefits for Social Security beneficiaries, but also for disabled veterans. And I think that that is obscene and something we must not allow to happen.
Let's hear from a Republican caller. Dave joins us from Fargo, North Dakota. Hi, Dave.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't think the Democrats won the election because the American people agree with the Democratic values. I think they won the election because half the people in the United States are on some kind of entitlement income. But Bernie's for taxing the rich. Okay, Bernie, that's great. Did you know, I'm sure you know, that if you confiscated all their money, that would only run the government for 21 days. What are you going to do for the other 344 days?
Well, Dave, I don't think we're going to confiscate anybody's money at all of anybody's money. But I do think, Dave, that at a time when this country has a grotesquely unequal distribution of wealth and income, where you have the top 1% in America owning 42% of the wealth and the bottom 60% owning 2.3% of the wealth, at a time when, in the last study that we have seen, 93% of all new income in the year 2010 went to the top 1%. When you see a middle class which is disappearing and people on the top doing phenomenally well, you know, Dave, I think it is absolutely appropriate to say to the wealthiest people in this country who are doing very, very well, to say to multinational corporations who in some cases pay zero in taxes, to say that, you know what, we are not going to do deficit reduction on the backs of the children, on the backs of senior citizens, on the backs of the sick and the lowest income people. The wealthiest people in this country also belong to America, and they're going to have to help us with deficit reduction.
Senator Bernie Sanders is an independent from Vermont. He just won re-election last week. He'll start his second term in January in the new Congress. Let's go to Joe, an independent in North Carolina. Hi, Joe.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I've got a problem with this country, how it gives China money and then it borrows money from China. It goes ahead, gives Saudi Arabia money, and for welfare. We give all the countries all this money, and we don't take care of our own. This is totally ridiculous. The first thing you have to do is take care of your own household. Once you clean your own household up, then you can go ahead and take care of everybody else. You don't go ahead and give grant money to find out why a shrimp can run on a treadmill. Why do you want to know what poi is in Hawaii? This is totally ridiculous.
Okay.
Once you clean everything up, then we can take care of us.
Well, Joe, thanks for your question. And obviously there's a lot of what you said that I agree with. But I think it is important for all Americans to understand how we got into the deficit situation we are in right now, because if we don't understand how we got into it, it's going to be hard to get out of it. As I think many viewers will remember, when Bill Clinton left office in January 2001, this country had a $236 billion surplus. What happened over the Bush years is we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and guess what? Bush and others decided not to pay for that war. When you go to two major wars, which can end up costing over $3 trillion at the end of the day, that adds to the deficit. If you give at the same time huge tax breaks, much of it going to the wealthiest people in this country, and you don't offset that, that adds to the deficit. If you pass a Medicare Part D prescription drug program and don't pay for that, that adds to the deficit. If, because you're in the midst of a terrible Wall Street-caused recession, and we are where we are today because of the recklessness, the illegal behavior on Wall Street, but you're in a recession, less revenue is coming into the federal government. At 15.2% of GDP, revenue coming in today is the lowest in 60 years. That is how we are where we are right now. And the way to get out of that deficit situation, I think, is to do it, as I said a moment ago, in a way that is fair, not on the backs of people who are working 60 or 70 hours a week to keep their heads above water, not on the backs of children by cutting their health insurance program, not on the backs of senior citizens by cutting their Social Security or their Medicare. So the struggle right now is to understand how we got to where we are, which is $1 trillion deficit and a $16 trillion national debt, and how do we go forward in reducing the deficit and, by the way, creating jobs in this country, which we desperately need, in a way that is fair.
Senator-elect Angus King of Maine announced yesterday that he will caucus with the Democrats. He is an independent. We see this headline in the Boston Globe: Maine's King gives Democrats a 55 to 54 Senate majority. Senator Sanders, what advice did you have for this fellow independent?
Well, I've known Angus a little bit over the years, and we've spoken a couple of times recently. Essentially, what he asked me about is what is it like to function within the Democratic caucus. And what I said is, as the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States, is that the Democratic leadership and Senator Reid have treated me with absolute fairness. They have not discriminated against me because I'm not a Democrat and am an independent. I got the very, very good committee assignments, and Senator Reid and others have been very responsive to the needs of Vermont, and that's what I conveyed to Angus King, and I'm glad he has joined the caucus, and as a fellow independent, I look forward to working with him.
Does it give the independent voice any more sway?
Well, I think it does. Angus is a true independent. He was governor of the state of Maine as an independent, and he won as an independent. So I do look forward to working with him. And
the committees Senator Sanders sits on include budget, energy and natural resources, environment, and public works, among others. As we mentioned, he is just finishing up his first term in the Senate, but he served for many years in the House, 1991 to the January of 2007. And before that, he was the mayor of Burlington. Let's go to Gloria, Wallace, Texas, Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning, Lydia. I was wondering, can you show that chart that you showed earlier about what the low-income up to the high-income earners would be paying in taxes?
Sure.
If we went over the cliff?
Sure, we'll get that ready for you, Gloria. And in the meantime, what did you make of it? Did it concern you?
What concerned me was that everybody is talking about how devastating it's going to be to go over the cliff. Well, just doing some quick computations here, I see that the people making under $20,000, that comes out to be $750 a week. And for the highest, you had $108,000, I believe, and up. That's only $270 a week. I don't think that the country is going to be devastated if those tax rates become effective. And the other thing I have to say is that President Obama did get a mandate to implement these taxes because he won over 2.9% of the popular vote, and that's a greater percentage than the last 4 or 5 presidents have won the popular vote, not counting Bush, who did not win the popular vote in 2001.
And Senator Sanders, the chart that Gloria is referring to comes to us from the Tax Policy Center, and it shows us what the tax increases could be depending on what sort of an income you make. We'll just take one here. If you make from $40,000 to $64,000, you could have an average tax increase of nearly $2,000.
Well, for people in that income category, that is a very significant tax increase. There's no question about it, and we have got to avoid it. And what the president has urged, and I absolutely support, is let's vote today. Let's vote next week on making sure that the bottom 98% of taxpayers in this country, people in the $40,000 to $50,000, people up to $250,000, we will make sure that they will be continuing to get the tax breaks that they have for the last many, many years. I think almost everybody is in agreement that we should do that. Where the disagreement is when at a time when we have a $1 trillion deficit, can we afford to continue to give huge tax breaks to people earning $250,000 a year or more? The American people in this election have said, no, we can't afford to do that. And I believe we cannot afford to do that. So that's really what the issue is. But extending the tax breaks For the middle class, absolutely, that is what we have got to do.
Cheryl joins us now from California, Republicans line. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Pierce, and I'm kind of calling for my mother. She's really shaken up about the senior citizens Medicare because she's got her own insurance and she's being forced to use Medicare, and now she can't get the proper medication that she needs. And why can't she use her Blue Shield? Why is she being forced to use Medicare? They're refusing to accept the Blue Shield now.
Well, Cheryl, I honestly don't know the circumstances that your mom is in. My suggestion is call up your congressperson in Texas or your United States senator, and they may be able to help you on this. But as I think everybody knows, Medicare is a national program where all people participate. People can also have supplementary medical programs, including Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Senator Sanders, yesterday the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke out and said that you can't tax the wealthy enough to deal with the nation's debts and deficit. Let's hear his statements, and then we'll get you to respond.
We know that you can't raise taxes enough to solve the problem. In fact, the big argument during the campaign over whether or not we should raise tax rates on people above $250,000 would have produced enough revenue to fund the government for 6 days. So we know that may be a good political talking point, but doesn't really deal with the problem. We're open to discussing all of this with the president. We all know, everybody who's studied the issue knows that until you make our entitlement programs fit the future demographic of our country, the demographics of our country, you can't possibly solve our long-term debt and deficit problems.
Senator Sanders.
You know, it's the same old business they've been talking about for years. Nobody suggests that asking the top 2% to pay a little bit more in taxes is going to solve all of our problems. I haven't heard anybody suggest it. But it will bring and help us deal with about $1 trillion of deficit in a 10-year period. You know what? That's not chicken feed. Not going to solve all of our problems. But if you listen carefully, and I hope people hear this, when Senator McConnell or anybody else talks about entitlement reforms, do you know what he's talking about? He's talking about significant cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. He's talking about either a chained CPI, which would reformulate the way we determine COLAs, cost of living adjustments, for seniors and disabled veterans, so that if somebody is 65 today, when they are 75, they would get $560 a year less. When they're 85, they get $1,000 a year less. It would also mean significant cuts for disabled veterans. So the choice that Mr. McConnell and my other Republican friends have to make is, do we ask millionaires and billionaires to pay a little bit more in taxes, or do we cut benefits for elderly people and disabled veterans? So I get a little bit tired of hearing from my Republican friends who say, oh, if you raise taxes on the rich, it's not going to solve our long-term problems. No one thinks it's going to solve everything, but it will help us bring in $1 trillion over the next 10 years, which is not even in Washington chicken feed.
Laguna Woods, California. Mike, independent caller, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Senator, I'm puzzled about the values of modern progressivism. And I think you're an excellent spokesperson to express that view. As you know, you had, I think it was an 8-hour filibuster against the provision in the tax cut, the Bush tax cut that related to the wealthy Americans. It amounted to about $100 billion a year. Yet I don't think you had a similar kind of demonstration against the $500 billion a year that's being squandered. Actually, that's too weak a word. Squandered in our so-called war on terror. It's actually creating enemies. It's creating our drone war, for example, in Pakistan is killing innocent people. This is a country that has an estimated 100 nuclear bombs. It's a very reckless foreign policy that modern progressives seem to be endorsing as long as President Obama is carrying it out. May I have your comment, please?
Sure. Well, for a start, again, if we are serious about deficit reduction, not only do we have to ask the wealthiest people to pay their fair share of taxes, not only do we have to end the absurdity of 1 out of 4 major and profitable corporations not paying a nickel in taxes, not only do we have to make sure that the wealthy and large corporations are not stashing their money in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, costing us about $100 billion a year, but we also have to take a look at defense spending and waste and unnecessary spending in other government agencies. In terms of drones and so forth, I do have real concerns about that. I am especially concerned that at a time when Senator McConnell and others are talking about the desire to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, they want to increase spending on the military, despite the fact that we are now spending almost as much as the rest of the world combined on defense. We're spending over 4% of our GDP on defense. NATO countries are spending about 2%. We're spending almost 3 times as much as we did in 1997. So if we are serious about defense spend, if we are serious about deficit reduction, I think we got to take a hard look at defense as well as other programs and making sure that the wealthy and large corporations pay their fair share.
Let's get one last phone call in for Senator Sanders. Terrell, you're up from Lansing, Michigan, Democrat.
Hi, how are you today? This is my first time getting in, and my comment is, why is it that we can give all this extra aid to all these different countries, right? But then when we try to feed our own people, try to give our own people Medicaid or Medicare. I am a dialysis patient. I'm in dialysis right now, cleaning my blood. And when I leave out of here, one of my medications that I take that they consider as a vitamin, I'm taking this for dialysis. I have to pay for it now. Now, you explain to me, how is that possible? How is that, why is that always on the American people? Why do we always have to pay for everything? You have these millionaires up here complaining about, them paying an extra little bit of money. Hey, us poor people in America made these millionaires what they are today. So give back a little bit. Now I'm waiting on a comment from that.
Well, I basically agree with you, Terrell. There are a whole lot of folks out there in the midst of this recession, which was caused, in my view, by the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street. Real unemployment is closer to 15% than it is to 8%. We have a lot of people from the middle class who have dropped off into poverty, and people are struggling. And I think it is immoral. I think it is wrong. I think it is bad economics to punish working people and low-income people who are struggling to keep their heads above water economically, and then say to millionaires and billionaires who are doing phenomenally well, oh, we're not going to ask you to pay a nickel more in taxes. So essentially I agree with what Terrell had to say.
And Senator Sanders, a tweet came in from Lonnie who asks about unemployment benefits as we wrap things up here and revisit this idea of the fiscal cliff, the so-called fiscal cliff. What will be done with unemployment benefits that will go unfunded for millions of people at the end of this year?
It is a very, very serious issue which has to be dealt with because that caller is right. One of the real concerns that we have. Some of the problems can be rectified in January or February, but I do not want to see millions of people left who are unemployed without getting their checks. So that is a major, major concern.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us this morning.
Thank you.